Hey everybody, Drew here. Have you ever had questions about where to invest, how to invest, what does investing look like? Well, this week I interview Grant Storer about investing and how you can get started in doing it today. So tune in and check it out. Hey everybody, welcome to the Tattooed Chap. This is Drew, and I got my good friend with me today, Grant Storer, and also this is my cat Vader that's hanging out with us. I don't know how long he'll stick around, but Grant, thank you for joining us today on Ask the Expert, and today we're going to be talking about finances and investing and things like that. And I brought you on because you were somebody that when I first met you as a young 18 or 19-year-old, like you were doing things that I wasn't even tracking, I wasn't even aware of in regards to money. And so I thought I'd bring you on so other people can maybe learn from you on some different things regarding that. And maybe I can still learn some stuff too. So maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, what are your interests, hobbies, are you married, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. And it's great seeing you. So my background is I came from Seattle Pacific University.
Yep.
And I fell in love with the school, and so I ended up staying a little longer so that I could pick up 3 degrees in development economics, accounting, and social enterprise. And I've been doing finance for years at SPU. I was part of the social investment fund through the student-led program. And so I was in charge of consumer staple markets. And it was really cool to take what was a craft just on a personal level and then take that into an institutional level. And so I have experience working in nonprofits in bookkeeping, and I never have officially gone into getting paid for finance because I never wanted to pollute my advice for people, because I always felt like I was selling people, and I have been focusing more my profession on economics, but finance has always been a deep passion for mine. And so so one of my hobbies is finance. I love learning about how to grow capacity for people, because that's the way I look at money, is that we have finite resources, but there's limitless potential that we have in it. And but other hobbies I have is obviously working out. We've worked out for years together, and football has always been fun. So that's kind of a little quick background about me. I'm single, and just using this time to continue to expand my knowledge. Another hobby is learning. I have one of my goals is to be able to have a full library sometime
of books you've actually read, right?
But the problem is, though, is again about a little bit of money weirdness, I guess, is most of my books come from half price books, Goodwill, and Value Village, and a lot of those places aren't accessible anymore. So I feel a little trapped because I love getting books that are $25 for $3.
Yeah. So just backstory, Grant, I met him. He was one of my youth staff at the church I worked at when I was hired as a youth pastor there. And I really got to know him then. And he was passionate about finances even then. And he was always talking about like who he was investing in and why and things that we should be expecting. I'm sitting here as a 30-year-old and he's 18 and he's like schooling me on money. And then we went our separate ways when I left that church and he went to school. And then I moved back up to the Redmond area, Redmond, Kirkland. And then he was going to school up there and working at a nonprofit. And then we were working out at the gym all the time, and it was some good stuff. But yeah, you've been passionate about that stuff, and that's one thing I think I appreciate about you when it comes to finances or finance and all that stuff is you haven't gotten into the game where you're trying to sell me something, as you mentioned, but you've been someone that's always been willing to teach and educate and show people how to make things happen in that world with no benefit to yourself other than maybe the enjoyment of teaching something to someone new. So I've always appreciated that about you. The other thing is, like you said, you're an avid learner. I don't know if I know anybody else that is so invested into learning as you. If you're not reading a book, then you're listening to an audio book at the same time. Like you're constantly, you're nonstop. When you were working on your college degrees, you went there for one, and then all of a sudden you're like, well, I'm going to stay another year so I can get this degree and learn a little bit more. And I'm going to, those are some things I've really enjoyed about you as a person. So, yeah.
Learning the hobby. So
Yeah.
that's the way I look at it.
So
Learning can be an intrinsic value. It can be something that you can find enjoyment in.
right.
So
Yeah. So I'm the same way. I love learning. I'm always reading a book. I have a stack of like 10 or 12 that I'm doing at a time. Like right there, you can see a bunch of them. But yeah. So one thing I think is also interesting about you, and I want to have you on here again in the future, is you have actually started a coffee company. Will you tell us a little bit about it? Because it's kind of unique in some of the things that you do. And I know we're here to talk about finance, but I thought this could be a cool little insight to who you are and what you do and what you're passionate about.
yeah, so I started a small coffee project called Paradigm Coffee Roasting, and it started with my economics research, and I was studying coffee farmers from an economic perspective, and I was trying to find a way to help provide more value for coffee farmers so that they could have a higher standard of living with more bargaining power was the idea. And long story short, I decided that the best way to do that was to try to create a comprehensive experience of coffee, because coffee is not just simply a commodity. We treat it as a commodity, but there's a lot of nuance. It's actually a lot more like wine. But there's a huge gap in knowledge from understanding that to from the lay person. And so what I started doing was I roast small batch coffee, but I'm also releasing a podcast that is giving a full 25-minute episode telling you everything about the coffee, on how to taste the coffee, but then giving it the whole backstory about where that coffee came from.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like the more that we can see what the story is behind coffee, the more we can see the value that's in there. And also, once you can see the value, you can then taste the value.
Right.
And yeah, and that's kind of in a nutshell what I've been working on is, can I use my economic research to create a engaging story about coffee in a way that we've never been introduced to before.
Right. Yeah. So if you guys haven't, well, I'm sure you haven't, but in the notes below, I'll put the link to the podcast so that way you can kind of hear a little bit about the coffee experience of his most recent batch. Also, what I'll put in the notes below is a link to, well, he has 2 podcasts that were released, and another one's on finance that's pretty in depth. So if you like this stuff that we're going to be talking about here in a second, I recommend that you go check out that. So yeah, I'm actually drinking my coffee that I got from you that I just got in the mail. It's really good. I enjoy it. And again, yeah, that I would love to keep on talking about it because we were talking about some stuff before we started recording, and I'm going to have you on here again, just talking about coffee and how it's roasted and all the different things about that. Cause like, the world of coffee just kind of exploded a little bit for me. So, yeah, so I'm sure other people would enjoy that as well. There's something else that is interesting. So you're just not like making coffee to make coffee, but it's benefiting the roasters in a way that traditionally it isn't. But you're also, isn't part of the proceeds go to like charity water? Is that kind of going on as well?
Yeah. So the more this expands, the more I'm going to try to come up with more creative ways of using money to have a broader reach of impact. Mm-hmm. So yeah, the idea is that by buying the coffee that I am roasting, this coffee is coming from an organization called De La Gente, which is helping boost the prices for coffee farmers in a economically sustainable way. And so that is on one end, is that by buying the coffee, you're buying it through a system that is helping coffee farmers. But then on my end, I'm using 40% of the profits to reinvest in some way in social programs. So right now, the first step is Charity Water, just because that is one of the strongest organizations for using every dollar effectively, in that 100% of the money that you donate goes straight into the field. And so that is the first step. But then the more this expands, the more I can use these profits to reinvest into coffee farmers as well. And
Mhm.
so that's the long-term goal on that.
So I encourage you guys, if you like coffee, this is a great opportunity to not just buy money and put it in some large corporation's pocket, but you can benefit the farmers that are growing this stuff that are often taken advantage of, but you can also make a difference in the world through other social programs. So make sure to check out. We'll have a link for Paradigm Coffee Roasters in the notes below too. So um, yeah, so maybe let's get started and we'll talk about some of the stuff about finance. Does that sound cool?
Sounds great.
Cool. So my first question, we're kind of in like a economic crash recession. I don't know what you want to call it, but COVID's really kind of messed up a lot of people's pocketbooks in various ways. And when I first met you, we were on the tail end of like the 2008 crash. And I met you in late 2010, and you took like a large or a small sum of money. You were 18 at the time, and you invested it, and you've seen like incredible, crazy growth from that. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about that story and what you learned from that experience and how you've just incorporated that into your life and like everything? And yeah,
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
we're in the same situation now. So
Yes. Yeah, that is why my second podcast, I decided to release it purely about finance, even though I'm trying to do coffee,
mhm,
is because we are in a unique time right now. That COVID-19 it's been a health pandemic, but it's also become an economic pandemic. And so while every crash is going to be different in its own way,
mhm,
we are nonetheless in a economic situation that is as severe as we experienced back in 2008 and 2009.
mhm,
And so I think this is a very important time for us. If we have the ability to make any kind of investments, this is on the short term, a very prime time to start doing this. And so back in 2008 and 2009, I was 18, 19 years old, and I had been studying finance for a long time, but I was always afraid to pull the trigger because I was always afraid of what I didn't know.
mhm,
And eventually, after everything was collapsing, I finally decided, okay, I have money saved up. We just need to start. And so very unsophisticatedly, I decided just to pick stocks I just liked initially. So I bought stocks of Amazon, Apple, Starbucks, Boeing, and Under Armour, and things like that. I bought like 8 stocks, and it was about $1,400 I put into it. And um, after about 10 years now, it went from $1,400 to, I just checked it right now, it's actually almost $13,000. Even while we're in the midst of a collapse, that
mhm.
has gone up over tenfold. And
And in a
one of the
10-year period.
yeah. And so, the biggest one was Amazon. I bought that when it was $127, and it ended up ballooning up to $2,400.
Oh wow.
So that was, yeah, it was incredible. But then also, I kind of had to take a step back. I'd been studying finance, and I finally did some practical things in executing on it. But then I was like, I actually don't really know what is going on here. I think I do. I've done some research. I understand how stocks work, and I have stocks and they're doing well. But like, I also ultimately just picked stocks I liked, and I felt like that's a little concerning here that
Mhm,
I'm doing well without really knowing what's going on. And so that's when I kind of doubled down on my research to say, okay, I can't use this as evidence of saying I'm an amazing stock picker because there's just so much I don't know, and this could become my own ultimate doom. And so over the last 10 years, I've been doing further research on this, and one of the things I have come to is learning more about diversification,
mhm,
and that is, I feel, one of the most vital things that we should be learning about investing is how to properly diversify.
mhm,
And because I bought just stocks, but the problem was they're all almost in tech. And so that problem with that is we're not experiencing it too much right now with COVID because technology has become one of the saving graces of
right.
the stock market. So, but we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, 2000, we had a lot of startups that were coming up and they were blowing up and making people lots of money. But that also became its own doom because we did not properly justify or properly value what is a company. And so we had companies that were only being valued on on their potential value and not on their financial value.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the things I've spent the last 10 years on, is more focusing on how to be more safe in investing here.
Right. So you mentioned something that I think is important to recognize. You mentioned that you bought a lot of Boeing, right? Or you bought some in Boeing. We're from Seattle. We see how Boeing can affect our economy up here. And but if you would have like dumped all your money in Boeing and Boeing type companies back then, not diversifying, you probably wouldn't see the returns that you did see, because right now the airlines are hurting with this COVID thing. And so that's why, diversification, not just in the tech stuff, but in a wider spectrum is important. Is that?
Absolutely. That was actually a following step I was going to say, is that Boeing was one of the stocks I had. And that was a very successful stock for me for the last 10 years. But if I was saying, hey, I'm a Seattleite, I'm going to invest in either all of Boeing, because a lot of my friends are in Boeing, and I know there's so many people that work in Boeing that I know, so they must be perfectly stable here because they all have their committed jobs to that, I would be hurting severely right now. Or even if I was just doing 50-50, I was like, I'm going to invest in just local Seattle companies, so it's just Starbucks and Boeing. Half my portfolio right now would be severely hurt right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is, exactly one of the drawbacks that we have when we are investing in individual stocks. And we can talk about it more in a second about how to properly diversify. But that is one of the downsides. Is one, that you may pick a stock that ultimately is not well, but even if it is doing well, doesn't mean it will always be doing well. And so the adage of don't put all your eggs in one basket is always true. It's that you don't want to be ever fully committed into one company, one sector, or anything like that. You want things that are what is called uncorrelated risk. You want to be able to have things that if this thing drops, it doesn't affect this other thing. And so that is one of the core tenets that we want when it comes to investing.
Yeah. That sounds cool. Before we get into like some of the nuances with like diversification and maybe some different ways to invest, I once heard it said that what the ideal situation or what we want to move to is we want to have our money working for us, not us working for money. I don't know if you've heard that saying or something similar to it. So can you explain to me like why maybe investing is important, or why if you're not investing, someone should maybe start at least looking at the different options that we're going to be talking about?
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest influences I ever had when talking about why investing is so powerful is a little simple mental exercise. You may already be aware of this because I think I may have even done this on you, but if you had just showing how powerful compound interest is, because that is ultimately why we're investing, is that we're trying to take something and we're trying to make it grow by its own essence, and not but the whole idea of making money work for us instead of working for money, instead of trying to increase my wages from 30,000 to 50,000. We're trying to find a way to make the things we have and make it bigger. So if you had a sheet of paper and it was infinitely long, but it's still a sheet of paper, so it's only going to be, like 1/50th of an inch or something like that. And if you fold it over, and if you fold it over again, and if you do that 50 times, how tall do you think that paper is going to be? Okay, we're doing 50 folds of a sheet of paper. Do you think it's going to be, as tall as a refrigerator? Or do you think it's going to be as tall as your house? Like, that seems kind of a little stretch. But just throw it out there. Do you think it's going to be as tall as the Empire State Building?
No.
Okay, those are the three things.
I feel like this is a trick question, but
what if you got to tell me? Even if you feel it's a trick question, what do you think of those three? Do you think it's going to be?
I'd say I think my natural tendency is because here's a piece of paper right here, right? Look how thin that is. If I was to fold that 50 times, I don't think it would be taller than my fridge, but that's as high as I wouldn't expect it to be taller than that. But even if it was as tall as my fridge, that'd still be pretty tall. That's in my mind. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Is that your final answer?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Well, actually, I kind of cheated because there's actually a fourth answer, which is like 92 million miles, which is the distance to the sun, which is the correct answer.
So if we took a piece of paper and folded it 50 times, it would reach to the sun, basically?
Yes.
Okay.
Again, that's why it has to be a theoretical paper, because there's no way we could physically do that. And also, we just physically could not be able to fold it that much.
Right.
But mathematically, because what we're doing is we're doubling it every single time. If you're folding it, you're taking the same thing and you're folding over. And so we can perceive that first like 3 or 4 folds, but once we get past like about 5 folds, we start getting into exponential growth that is so hard to understand. That our minds are not designed to be able to think that exponentially. And so that is what we want with our investing, is that the more you're able to invest in a principle that is growing, then the more time you have, the more time you give it time to grow and develop, the more it has exponential growth. And so that is one of the biggest things about the millennial generation. Well, actually, the millennial generation, we're actually starting to age now. So it's actually becoming like the Gen Z. It's so important for the younger generation to just start. If you can just put something small in, it has huge growth potential. Because like for me, like I put in like $1,000 and it's already grown 10 times because of not only having time there, but because of the opportunity, because the market was down. And when we look at the market as a whole over the last like roughly 90 years, the S&P 500, or at least the equivalent of the S&P 500, has been averaging about 9.8% growth per year, even with accounting for the Great Depression or the Great Recession. I haven't looked at data yet to see how COVID-19 has affected it yet. But when we look at the long-term track, we are averaging about 10% roughly. That's the general benchmark. You as the average person is probably getting slightly less than that, but that is what the market's been doing.
So and I think that's something that's interesting. You said you haven't looked at COVID yet, but the idea behind it is this isn't a short game. It's a long game. So even if we do see a dip right now, that's actually not a bad thing necessarily, because it's going to self-correct eventually. And because the data that you're talking about is already taken into account different recessions and the Great Depression and all that. And so we could, so theoretically, that even if we're in a dip, it's going to correct and it's going to get back to that average, somewhere close to that average after this in a couple of years. And so now is the time to actually maybe invest because we can get it at a lower price.
Yes. One of the ways I've always viewed stocks investing is that when we hear like a stock has gone down, a lot of people freak out because they say, what is happening with that stock? Is there something wrong? And especially if you own stock in that company, then that's money you've lost. And so you take that really personal. And so our reaction is to minimize our pain. And so if we see our money going out the window, then our gut reaction is to shut the window, try to stop it from leaving. And so you want to sell your stocks and get out of it. But we're making errors in a principle that is short-term versus long-term. And so by talking about how the stock market has done over the last 90 years, that's a long-term perspective. And when we have investing, we want to be looking at things from a long-term perspective. We evaluate things are happening in the short term, but we are using a long-term perspective on how to look at short-term events. And so you want to be able to get that large exponential growth, and you need a lot of time in order to do that. However, we're living in a short-term world. And so what's happening right now is, while it is a very painful time for us in a short term, what this does is it makes it an amazing time to get a lot of potential growth in the long term, because things are down. And so the way I look at stocks is almost like if you were shopping, actually, in that if you were going shopping and let's say that, I think clothes is an easy one. I think there's more fun examples, but I think clothing is an easy one. If you're going shopping for clothing and you happen to go into a store that has a clearance rack or something like that, you'll see that something that was $80 is now $15. Well, it's much easier to buy that because it's like, this is what other people were paying for before. They were paying $80 and now it's now $15. So I am saving myself, $65. And so you feel like you're winning there. Right. And so that is a way of how to look at short-term events in the stock market, is that the stock market has, when at its bottom with the COVID, we dropped like about 33%. And so what that means is that could be very scary. That could be very dangerous, that 33% of what you have has been lost in the short term. But since you haven't sold it, it doesn't really matter. What you should be looking at is everything out there in general is 33% less than it cost you before. So not only are you able to buy things, you'll be able to buy more things with the same amount of money. But then if we expect things to return back to normal, then there is so much more growth potential. Like crazy stat here is if you had $100 in investment and you lost 50% of it, you now have $50. But the problem is we think that in order to get back to $100, we need to get a 50% growth to get back to where we were. Like we lost 50%, we need 50% to come back. However, it's actually 100% growth is what we need to get back to 100 because we have 100, 50% of that is $50. But 50% of $50 is only 25. So we only had it with 25. So what that's helpful for is if we are buying it at $50 and if we expect that in the long term it's going to return back to 100, that means we are receiving 100% growth. So that's what makes short-term events so advantageous for us as a long-term perspective.
I know we're talking a little bit more about like stocks and I'm assuming mutual funds and EFTs and stuff like that. But another example is we bought our house in Auburn for just shy of $200,000, and this was in 2010 after the housing bubble thing. But with the growth in Seattle and all that kind of stuff, in 10 years our house has doubled in value as well because we bought it at a time. It was a foreclosure. We bought it at a time when it was a buyer's market. And I think it's kind of a similar principle. We bought it at a low value and rents double in the area since then and all that stuff. So it's turned into a really good investment in that capacity.
Yeah, absolutely. It's real estate is, and also that is just an example that investing is the same everywhere. The stock market is the least hands-on element. There's not anything that you personally can do to make stock get more valuable. It's something that's out of your control. While real estate, you have a little bit of control. You can buy a foreclosure and it can be beaten up and you can fix it up and you have a hands-on role in increasing its value along with the market changes as well. But that's the same thing as what can you do with the resources you have to make an exponential growth? And so if you are a very hands-on person, if you have skills that are applicable in a particular investment, then that gives you a leg up in the whole investment game, is that you can manufacture your own future essentially.
Yeah. So one thing I talk about for soldiers anyways is, we get our pay, and then we also get what they call the basic housing allowance. And if you live on post, that basic housing allowance goes to the house that's on post that you're living in. You don't see any of that money. But if you live off post, then you get to use that basic housing allowance for the general market. If you let's say you get in this area, you get about $2,000. If you can find a rental for $900 a month, then you get to pocket the rest of that money. So it's like an increase in wages. Or if you buy a house, that goes into your mortgage. And a lot of soldiers that are savvy, what they'll end up doing is buying a house and they'll live in it for 3 or 4 years while they're stationed there. And that's every month the Army is putting that money into basically paying off their mortgage, And if you think about $2,000 a month for, that's like almost $100,000 in 4 years that's going into someone's mortgage payment. And then they leave and they get a property manager that rents it out to another soldier and takes care of it for them. And they go somewhere else and buy another house and do the same thing. I've known 3 or 4 soldiers that have 3 or 4 houses doing that kind of thing. And by the time they retire, they're going to have 4 houses that are making them money, doing similar types of investments and using resources that a lot of times people are kind of like just thrown away, if you will. But yeah.
Yeah, that's what is great about that, because there's like when I hear it coming from the 2008 era, there's a little bit of fear like, wait a minute, if you're buying so many houses, what are you doing? Like, are you over leveraging yourself? However, what is unique about that situation is that you're getting that money from the military, that there is an income stream. You're not just buying and getting low rates and basically trying to manipulate the market
Right.
and basically stacking a house of cards that if you pull one out, everything's going to collapse, is that there is something stable there that is able to fund that mortgage. And
Right.
so that is a way to use the resources you have to create that exponential growth that we've been talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So, so what makes like what are and this kind of leads into that 'cause you said like kind of has that like is this a good investment or not? Um, what how can we determine if something is a good okay investment? Is there investments or uh, places that we should maybe avoid, or maybe what are some places that might maybe a different way to phrase it is where should we start investing type question?
Yeah, I mean that's the big core question is where to start. And one of the things I've learned about investing is that money ultimately is fiat. Is what that means is that it doesn't have any value in itself. We have to assign value to that,
Mhm.
which that goes to investing, but that's also for our own finances. And so as a result, when we look at a particular stock, like if we look at Apple, we can use a very technical analysis and go look at how much cash they have on hand. We can look at different principles. There's a lot of different ratios out there to give us a better picture of what is the financial health of a company.
Mhm.
However, none of that can be taken absolute because we all play a role in the value of Apple. Is
Mhm.
that we can like there's a lot of people who use what's called fundamental analysis and they can be very technical in saying we are looking for companies that need to have a certain amount of profit over over their liabilities in order to justify an investment, and those are all good benchmarks, but like I don't that's nothing I focus on, and that's not why I tell people to focus on, because ultimately one it's very technical, it's very hands on, and it's not foolproof. It's not going to be something that we can rely on absolutely that is going to remove any of the downside risk. And so where I say to start is to invest into what are called ETFs, which are funds. If you're familiar with a mutual fund, it's basically the same thing in that it's an account that has a bunch of different stocks within it. And
Mhm.
so that accomplishes one of the things that I mentioned earlier, which is diversification. And that what we want is we want to be able to invest diligently with minimal amount of hands-on work, because the more that we get involved emotionally in a particular investment,
Mhm.
our we are going to sway that value.
Right.
And so we want to be principled, and we want to take ourselves out of the equation as much as possible. And so fortunately there's a lot of resources out there that allow us to do this automatically almost. And so there's, I think we might want to talk about this more later, but one of the things I've been telling people is to show how easy it is to start is there are programs out there, they're called robo advisors.
Mhm.
And there are these investment companies that are using algorithms to put together portfolios just specifically for you and based on your own unique circumstances, based on how old you are, what your financial goals are, how much money you have, what your risk tolerance is, which is probably the most important variable. And they
Mhm.
take all that into consideration, and they create a portfolio just for you that's full of different ETFs that are hitting different parts of the stock market. So you'll have an account that is a domestic large caps ETF, which then means by buying this one ETF, you're going to have anywhere from 50 to maybe even 500 different stocks all in that one account that you're
Mhm.
buying small pieces of. And then there'll be another account that's going to be maybe hitting the mid cap of the market. And then there's like international. And then they'll even counterbalance that with bond accounts. And so you're getting stocks and you're getting bonds.
Mhm.
And which was right now we're seeing a really good if you had invested in bonds, because with the stock market dropped, and then it was kind of scary for a while because bonds actually started dropping as well, which they're supposed to be uncorrelated,
Mhm.
and but now bonds have kind of stabilized while the stocks had continued to further down, and then the stocks have come back up while the bonds have been stable, and so by having these two different counterweights, we allow ourselves that even if one thing starts dropping, one thing might be affected a little bit, but it's moving slower, and
Right.
so we aren't losing everything all at the same time. And so, if you can get into a robo advisor, I have a particular favorite just because I like their strategy of how they invest. But there are 3 or 4 major robo advisors out there that I've been testing on myself. Like I use all of them still. Like I said, I have my own particular favorite that I put more money into, but I use all of them because they all have something that is unique to the table that can hit a different demographic. And so, yeah.
So maybe what if you're interested in doing this, we'll put links to maybe some of those robo advisors. I'm assuming they have web pages and all that kind of stuff that kind of explain it. So we'll put links to in the notes below if you're interested in looking at that. And
yeah. So that's one of the first thing. What's great about this is you can set up any of these accounts. You can probably be having an investment ready within 20 minutes.
And
so you know what's going on.
So let's say like you're 19 and you don't really have flexible income, like maybe not a lot. But I'm assuming that we all probably go out and grab coffee from Starbucks, or we go, to the club, or, that type of thing. And so we have some disposable income. Could you start using a robo advisor with ETFs or mutual funds or whatever, something like along those lines? Could you start with just $5 a month?
That will be a slow progression, but you can do that. That a lot of these accounts don't have any minimums, and so anything you can do to start, I think, is healthy. That is, I think, the most important, especially with how unique of a time we're in right now. That's one of the things I'm telling people is that $100 isn't going to change your life. It's not going to set you up for retirement 30, 40 years from now. However, a lot of us, I think, are afraid of just starting. There's so much fear of the unknown. And we hear so many horror stories about investing that we just say, we keep putting it off and we keep putting it off. And this is a unique time that can have so much potential benefits for us. And so while the $5 a month isn't going to change your life, I would still say if that's all you can budge, do that. Because once you start it, you'll see how accessible everything is. One of the biggest lies about investing really has been how complicated it is. We have a lot of technical stuff, and it doesn't have to be as scary and technical and intimidating as we feel it is. And so once you're in it, it's easy to keep going.
It's kind of like fitness, right? I mean, it's like,
absolutely.
I can't run a marathon, so I'm not going to run. It takes so much work to do that. Well, can you get out and run a block? If you can't run a block, maybe you can get out and walk a block. And then next week, after doing it for a week of walking, maybe pick up the pace a little bit. Eventually, you might be able to get to running the block, and then you can make it 2, and then you can make it 3. But every step counts along the way in that journey to running a marathon, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And even then, like, I don't know if you still feel this, but I love when we worked out together, because it's like, even though I have years of experience of working out, it's still hard to just start every single day. But once you get in the car and you go to the gym, which, I mean, we don't have that option right now, but whenever you are in a workout setting, it's easy to stay in it. Right. It's just the difficulty is getting into that state. Once you're in that state, it's easy to remain in that state.
Right. So, okay, cool. I think that's, I think that's cool. If you guys like this stuff, make sure to push the like button. And if you think this could be beneficial for someone, make sure to share it. And again, we're going to have links below to some of those different robots that you can look at, or robo advisors, not robots. I guess they're robots in a way. So we'll have links to those in the notes below. And again, to your podcast about financing, because I think it's really well crafted and kind of goes into the nuts and bolts on some of the stuff that we're talking about. I want to shift a little bit because we're talking about money. And I think in this day and age, we have a lot of people that are trying to keep up with the Joneses, and they get themselves into debt. They have bills, like they have to pay for rent, and they have other obligations and so on and so forth, responsibilities. There's a famous financial guru. There's a lot of them out there, but one of them, Dave Ramsey, has his 7 baby steps on financial health, or to get to financial health, and things like that. Do you have what's your recommendation for people just with money in general? Like, is there things that they should be tackling first? If they have a bunch of debt, should they jump into investing? Should they pay off the debt first? Is it a both and? Like, where should I start if I have never even thought about money, and I live paycheck to paycheck, so I'm spending it all at the mall. Does that make sense? I threw a bunch of questions at you, but
Yeah. Well, they're all connected, and so it's a lot, but it's a fascinating topic. So one quick thing, I credit Dave Ramsey as the sole the source of what got me into this whole world of finance. I learned about him when I was 14 years old, started listening to his radio, and he became the biggest influence when it comes to my philosophy in finance. And I've had the great opportunity of meeting him a couple of times when he's been in Seattle. And so he is the master when it comes to getting people out of debt. His system is very rigid, but it's also for a purpose in that he has the 7 baby steps, and they are uncompromising. And because his audience is those who have been burned financially, they got irresponsible, and now they are having this wake up call. They're being foreclosed on. They have mounting credit card debt and student loans, and they are living paycheck to paycheck, and they just need that accountability. And so I would say if you're in that situation, following Dave Ramsey to the letter, I think you're not going to go wrong in that. So I think that's one step. And Dave Ramsey, his first step in the baby steps is to try to save up $1,000. Basically, you need to be able to get yourself a financial cushion before you can address any of the variables in life. You need to have internal stability. And so once you do that, then you can start tackling your debt. And he has a philosophy that what he likes to say is that 80% of finance is just emotions. It's psychology, and it's only 20% math. And so mathematically, if we're talking about our debts, we would want to try to we would have to find the highest interest rate, because again, that whole paper folding analogy and how much exponential growth, how much that is good for us, that's also working against us. So if you're having credit cards and loans and stuff like that have high interest rate, that paper folding is happening on our own money against us. And so mathematically, we would want to try to curb those ones as much as possible. But what we're dealing with here, again, because money is fiat. And so not only is money, we're about assigning value to our investments. Every dollar doesn't have an absolute value. We have a role in what a particular dollar means to us. And so if we are paying mathematically the most efficient way, it may not be emotionally the best way. Just like working out or dieting, there may be the perfect thing for us, but if we can't buy into it, we're not going to stay with it. And so that's where a lot of these things, it's all about moderation. It's what is going to work personally for you. There are a lot of principles out there, and use those as reference points. And so, but ultimately you want to do what is going to help get you to the next step. And so if you need some discipline, Dave Ramsey is a great source for that. For me personally, one of the things I do for myself when it comes to finances is I focus on trying to, there's a couple different, I just stumbled into a deep thought process there. I might have to actually back up a little bit. But so short answer, Dave Ramsey is a great source for that. And that if you want to get out of debt, following his route is good. One thing I would do is, we're kind of circling around all this, is budgeting. Is that in order to execute any of this, to start doing investing, to get out of debt, to buy a house, you need to know where your money is going. Which budgeting is a very scary topic. And Dave Ramsey has a no-nonsense way of approaching it, and it's great. Again, if you need some discipline, go for that. But one of the little things I would like to plug in when it comes to budgeting is budgeting isn't supposed to be viewed as dieting. And what's maybe that's not a good analogy as much anymore, because I think at least we should be more aware that dieting doesn't work, because again, it's all about limiting yourself. And what we're supposed to be doing is we're supposed to be assigning what is the most valuable to us. And so it's not about just cutting calories. It's about, where do I want to put the calories? What is going to give me the most value out of the calories I have? And so budgeting is the same way. It's all about, where do you have a certain amount of resources? What is going to get you the most happiness out of that.
and
And
and not just in but also and I think that's where we screw up in both our diets and in finances, as we look at the short-term happiness, like, oh, that piece of cake looks really good, but like, we don't necessarily want to just live on cake alone, because in the long run that's not going to be good for us. We're actually not going to feel happy in the long run, but it's kind of looking at the long term as well. And I'd say it's probably the same for finances when it comes to our budgets as well.
yeah, but also this is where I deviate from a lot of financial theory when it comes to budgeting. Is one of the common things that people knock on when they talk about budgeting. You go, how much money do we spend on coffee every week, and how much money is going out the window, and how much you are throwing away your retirement on frivolous things. But I think that's the wrong attitude towards it, which is to demonize any particular thing and say that is a wasteful thing. And because again, we have our own values on things.
Right.
Maybe coffee is important to you. Like, I mean, for me, coffee is very important. I don't go get lattes just because I like getting just black coffee or espressos. But I am not opposed to spending more on something like coffee over eating out, because coffee is more valuable to me. And so one of the things about budgeting is what I love about budgeting is it's helping me to identify what is important to me. And so you should be making the budget not based on what a particular metric is and saying, hey, you should be only spending 20% on food or something like that. Don't hold yourself rigid. It's about, you have a certain amount of finite resources. What is going to give you the most happiness? And so if cutting out Netflix is financially the most prudent thing, but if it makes you miserable, keep the Netflix and find what is not, enjoyable to you and cut that out. And so that is one little philosophy is understand what are your parameters and spend it in the way that is giving you the most value. And so, and if you can plug in investing in there, then you're assigning value that, hey, I'm investing my future and this is how much I can afford at this time. And so one little quirk I would like to plug in real quick about budgeting is, again, a lot of us live paycheck to paycheck. And so all these different things, they're all great. Like, even investing can be fun, but I think a lot of us are like, I can't do this right now. I'm stuck in paying off all these debts. And so I just have no wiggle room. And this is a little contrary to Dave Ramsey's philosophy. But one of the things I talk about I kind of lean into his psychology, but I use it from a different rationale, which it's all about 80% behavior, 20% math. And so what I say when it comes to starting, especially right now when interest rates are really low, and a lot of banks are giving out personal loans to help with people with COVID-19. What I would say, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, I would actually think it's okay to take a little bit more debt on the short term to provide some stability. Because like traditional budgeting says, okay, for May, how much am I going to earn this month? And then how am I going to spend May? But what I actually do is for the month of May, how my budget is set up, I'm actually, my budget is based on April. So what happened is throughout the month of May, I'm spending the money I earned in April. And so what's great about that is instantly, by the first month I did this, I no longer, even if I don't have any money in savings or anything like that, I am no longer living paycheck to paycheck instantly, because it doesn't matter if I get laid off and I can't get access to unemployment, or something happens chaotically. I know that I have all of May's month expenses are already covered. And so now when I get ready for June, it's all going to be based on what I'm earning right now. And so you at least have 1 month buffer going into every month. And so that's my one step on that. And so if you don't have any savings, then I think it's okay to take out a personal loan so that you can have that cash in hand so that you can create this buffer. And then you can use the principles to pay off those loans, and using the Dave Ramsey principles to snowball your way out of it. But that's one of the things is, like, again, you don't need to hold anything absolute. And so it's all about what is going to help you get from point A to point B.
I think that's really important to kind of some of the stuff that you're talking about is, though I like the dieting analogy and all that stuff, because we look at diets as being something that is like I don't want to do this. It's not fun. It's miserable. So I'm going to do it for the short term. But what you're really talking about here is a lifestyle, like we use that cliche, like it's not a diet, it's a lifestyle. Something that is sustainable for the long term, like principles that we can put in place. And it's not like that, like you're saying, percentages and all that kind of stuff. There's things we can do that, but with finances and everything. But really, what we want to do is kind of get into a place of where we're telling our money where we want it to go, as opposed to the money dictating where it's going, type thing. So, like you're saying, like if Netflix makes me happy and it's $10 a month, then don't get rid of it. Find the $10 somewhere else to pay off debt or to invest with something that doesn't have as much value to you. And I think that's a really important principle to kind of look at it in that style, that way. What is important, what isn't important, what can you, at least for me, like I want a new pair of shoes, but I have a couple other pairs. But my main pair that I like to wear a lot are kind of getting old. And it's like, well, maybe instead of going out and buying a brand new pair of shoes right now, I can wait a month, and that's just another month's worth of finances that I can put somewhere else. And I can do that happily with a little bit of sacrifice. But if I had no shoes, or or if that was my only pair, I'd want to spend it right away because, they're starting to fall apart, type thing. So I think it's just kind of like knowing your situation. And I think this is kind of an important thing is whoever's watching this, we don't know your exact situation, where you're at financially, how much you're making, how much debt you have, like the stability of your job. And so I think you have to be like self-aware of where you're at and be real with yourself and your situation and not hide it, but just be like be honest with yourself. I think it's same with health, right? You're like, I'm not that bad out of shape, but when you get on the scale, it says you're like 50 pounds overweight. Well, maybe you actually are out of shape. You just need to be honest with yourself. And I think it's the same thing financially. And once you're honest with yourself, it kind of gives you an indication of where maybe you need to start, or things that you can start working on, even if they're little tiny baby steps, if you will, one way or the other. And there's a lot of resources out there. If you're in the Army, there's, the financial advisors that you can go to on post. I recommend using them. Or, there's a lot of stuff online that you can look at. And for your own particular situation, there's other financial advisors that you can go to and stuff as well. So make sure to utilize those things. You don't have to fight this fight on your own, but there's people probably in your life that you could go to as mentors. And there's people that, that's their job too, is to help people. So make sure to utilize that stuff. So as we're wrapping up, Grant, do you have any final advice, tips, or encouragement that you'd like to give people that are maybe kind of thinking about investing, or just the money journey as a whole, that you'd like to offer people?
Yeah, I guess a way to summarize a lot of this is just know that it's okay to be scared. Like a lot of this is intimidating, but also as somebody as we are on the outside of this, say it's not that scary. Like jumping into the pool, you can feel how scary it is and how cold it's going to be. But once those who are in it, you can't understand it until you're in it. But just like I lean into that and know that it's going to be okay. And that there are options out there that allow you to slowly go in there and to go in there diligently.
Right.
And so I guess that's just one little step of encouragement, is that there is a way out. There is a different way of approaching life. And it's just lean into that you don't know, and that's okay. And just start the path and just allow one step to take into the next step. And the more you're comfortable with that, and your comfort level is a valid point in this, is do what is comfortable. If $10 is all that you can do, there are options out there that allow you to do that. I guess one little quick plug to make it easy is one of the robo-advisors is called Acorns, and you can have it set up to your credit card or your debit card, and it will basically round up your features so that if you spend $5.50 on something, at a convenience store or something like that, it'll round up to $6. And basically, once you have like $5 worth of loose change, it will invest it into a diversified portfolio for you. And so, like,
Yeah.
That's one easy step you can do that is unintimidating. You won't even I still use it, and I've accumulated almost $700 in investments just from my loose change over the last few years.
And
And
you
so
don't
that's
even
one.
notice that, and you don't even notice that money missing.
Exactly. And so, so just know that there are ways to move forward, and it doesn't have to be as scary. But also give yourself grace and know what is your limit.
Okay, cool. Well, finally, and you just mentioned it. Well, like we said, we'll have some of the robo advisors down there. I'll put a link for Acorn as well, if that's something that interests you guys, in the notes. Is there any other resources before we wrap up that you're like, yeah, people should know about this resource, they should read this book or listen to this podcast, besides your own podcast, of course?
Yeah. So Dave Ramsey's The Total Money Makeover is one of the essentials when it comes to like just general how to start finances. And so that's one I use a lot when I was growing up. I think that's really valuable. There's another book that came out called The Index Card, and it's basically 12 straightforward principles about finances. There's a lot of overlap, but it's just another perspective of it. Actually, there's a Freakonomics podcast that's just focused on that book, and so that's a really easy, quick, like half-hour digestion of a lot of very basic principles. And also, Tony Robbins came out with a finance book a few years ago that was actually really helpful. It was through that I learned about Ray Dalio and a lot of his investment philosophy on diversification.
Okay.
And so that would be another one I highly recommend, because Tony Robbins is a motivational speaker, but the book is actually primarily written by a lot of other financial advisors, and he was just the one that kind of brought them all together. So that would also, it's more technical, but that would be a very valuable resource as well.
So with those books, because I know sometimes books, like a lot of us, I like to listen to like audiobooks while I'm working out. Are these books that we should get the hard copy or audiobooks, or does it matter in these ones? Since we're talking about numbers and finances, would the hard copies be better?
They would be better, just because, there are some numbers, but they're all accessible and you can still learn a lot. Like, I think all of those I first listened to.
Okay.
And I end up getting physical copies of all of them just as reference points, because they'll have like some graphs in there. But the audiobooks do a good job at audibly displaying that information.
Okay.
And so since a lot of these are about principles, you don't really, the numbers aren't that technical unless you're a visual learner. And so it's supplemental, but it's not essential.
Okay, cool. Well, Grant, I just want to say thank you for coming on and kind of talking with us. And hopefully you guys that are listening, you got some good stuff out of this, or at least prime the pump and kind of help you kind of start thinking about money and maybe what to do with it. Again, I highly recommend find a mentor or a financial advisor that can speak to your specific situation. We'll have some links below, some resources that you can tap into. And if you do not have a favorite coffee, try some Paradigm coffee, and good stuff, because you help farmers and you help people have clean drinking water at the same time. So anyways, Grant, thank you for joining us, and I'll see you around. Thank you for tuning in to Ask the Expert. Make sure to check the notes below for all the different resources that we talked about on how to start your investing journey. And make sure to like and subscribe so that way you can be informed when we have other videos coming out. Anyways, praying for you. God bless you guys, and bye.